Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, I hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. Folks, today we're going to talk a little bit about betrayal. I know that's a big one, right? Encompasses so much. It's a big one. I'm going to do my best, though, to try to compress it so it's not an ultra long video for you, but I'm going to touch on some elements of betrayal, right? First of all, betrayal, what is it? It's the result of something, right? Betrayal just doesn't happen in a vacuum. Typically, a betrayal happens overtly in the sense that it was intended, right? There's an intention to betray, and there could be an unintended side where they betrayed me, but they were, maybe caught in the crosshairs of decision making and made a poor choice, right? Made a bad decision. And there can be a little bit of a scale there, right, on that side of the unintentional, and it can tread pretty close. But more often than not, a betrayal is intended, right? A coworker who's talking bad or falsely about other coworkers or peers or management or others at work. Leaders doing the same, support staff doing the same. This is real obvious and happens often, right? And does not help whatsoever culture, organizational culture, or any facet of culture. But betrayal, a lot of times we don't really dive deep into much of what betrayal is. I think sometimes folks just caught up. I used to say to my son when he was a teen, I guess he was a middle teen, and he wanted to do something. And I said, yeah. But then when he wanted to do something similar with a bunch of his buddies, I go, I don't know, Jake. Well, you know his name, but but I basically was, look, I trust you, right? I trust you. But when you get with your young buddies, his buddies were young also, you guys, the exponential result of your behavior is bad, right? They get exponentially less intelligent. Let's just use that phrase to be kind, right? But you can absolutely trust your own child or a peer or a friend or whatever. But something about when people get into groups, and this is an area where we have to guard ourselves so that we don't get unintentionally sucked into a betrayal of others, right? Maybe those who aren't there or those who are there, wouldn't matter, right? And so it's having that forethought. But you can see where betrayal, there are components to it, but the component typically, uh, it's folks not stopping the chain of events. When you were talking about safety, we want to walk back and we want to make sure we stop the chain of events before something catastrophic happens, right? Obviously, we don't want people to get hurt and we don't want damage to equipment either, but it's breaking the chain of events. What with betrayal, because so much of that can be individual and often is, we have to make sure that our thoughts, our words, and our deeds, right? And we're human beings. We can make mistakes or we can be frustrated and just blow off steam. But we have to break that chain. We got to break that chain either after the thought or after the words, and then not take actions, right? It's okay to feel the feelings, but it's not okay to act on the feelings, right? because because oftentimes what can result, and it could be a perception thing too. We can all get caught up in perception. We can project onto others a particular, it's the halo effect, where we project, oh, these people are the kindest, blah blah blah. But if you were to watch their family or their life close up, you wouldn't necessarily think so. But the halo effect often fools any of us and has fooled, all of us. What about relatives, distant relatives you haven't seen for a long time? Your brain remembers, usually, unless you've had some negative experiences, but your brain is going to latch on to those, positive, pleasing memories. Spend a week or two with them, and then you start to see just pretty much how normal they are, right? The halo effect then fades away. But we can do this. We can do this with our own families, distant families. We can do this with friends we haven't seen. You can do this with peers or people you went to school with and you haven't seen in years or decades, remembering how they once were and how nice they were, da da da. The nice person that grows up to be the total jerk, right? Or the jerk that grows up to be so it can kind of work in reverse too. Kind of the double horn thing, instead of the halo effect. And so we have to catch ourselves, right? When we're thinking about those sorts of things. But that's just an acknowledgement and awareness. It's different, though, when people are betraying others. Oftentimes, it's because it was an intended thing. And when that intention happens and bad things follow, then is there accountability? If there's not accountability, that betrayal lingers and it can shatter relationships. It can estrange people, right? Another type of betrayal, and this is a different take on it, so just bear with me, but you can betray yourself into believing, we'll use a work environment to begin with, into believing that your employer really cares about you and their employees, right? You kind of gaslighted yourself, right? That's a self-betrayal, right? That's what gaslighting is when it's done that way, is you betrayed yourself into thinking these folks actually care for you. But underneath it all, once you do discover that isn't the case, right? That halo effect obviously also can be seen there. That dissolves the halo effect, right? But now that betrayal, when they do start to do things that are betraying their employees, if you're one of those, when they betray your entire team, right, or individuals on the team, maybe some nefarious things were done toward them, right? Then the true colors are revealed. So with betrayal, when those betrayals happen, do you have the courage then to leave that organization? Because if you don't, you're saying it's okay for you to betray me. I saw you betrayed these others, and so on. And I have been in organizations where that has also occurred, where I've seen a chain of people depart who were highly credible, very professional, and and one can fool themselves into thinking, oh, well, they're just moving, dancing somewhere else. Well, the reality is you got to look a little deeper. There is something else going on, right? Because then it will eventually bear itself out. When it bears itself out toward you or those close to you, then you're aware. Now you have to make a choice. Are you going to allow that betrayal to stand, right? And in this sense, walking away, right? So there's a betrayal to yourself. There's a betrayal that happens to one. There's a betrayal that you can do by staying, but you can also betray yourself if you react to that betrayal, right? To react to that betrayal to do something else that isn't so great, right? Don't take revenge into your own hands. The best revenge is just to walk away. Now, think of relationships now where people betray each other often, and so where does the betrayal come in there? Well, it's a betrayal to yourself to stay in a relationship that is toxic. Okay, it isn't a betrayal to walk away, but conditioning, our traditional conditioning says I'm betraying potentially my faith. I'm potentially betraying the broader family. I'm betraying a paradigm, a picture that I'm supposed to make sure looks perfect or nice or whatever, right? What you're saying is I'd rather betray my own heart, my own emotions, my own life, instead of being honest and and that's really what means to have self-respect, to then walk away, right? And in doing so, you're not betraying them. You're freeing them and you're freeing yourself. But when you don't, then you betray yourself and you're betraying them, right? That is a form of revenge. It's they're betraying you. You know they're betraying you. It may be already out in the open. Now to stay in that relationship is a betrayal to them, right? Because they're obviously not going to grow through it or past it, and you're not going to grow through it or past it because now you've already betrayed yourself, and now you're not going to feel right. You're going to feel like everything's unbalanced. Now, organizationally, relationally, doesn't matter. And this could be family, same way, right? If they betray you and then you try to, maintain a brave face or to put on a face or a front or to make things look, you know, good for the public type of thing we're supposed to, because we're family, that is a major gaslight, right? That's a societal gaslighting. If somebody's, being toxic toward others, there's no harm in letting that go. And it's not, and that is not a betrayal. You're actually giving everybody a chance to reflect and move on in their own path, because those people who betrayed you will go on to find somebody else to betray, and that will in itself be its own justice, right? You moving on is to honor yourself as well, and then gives you a chance, right? But you learn the lesson. What you need to learn from that is it's not okay that if your organization is betraying you, right, that you take it into the rest of culture and betray others, right? This shift of dominoes. It's like nobody deals with the problem at hand. They just find the next person to bully, right? This is really kind of where bullying comes from. It becomes from these things not being resolved that become, this negative behavior, these toxic behaviors that now have that energy has to go somewhere. So that bully, targets other people, other relationships, other people in the work environment. It doesn't matter what paradigm or groups we're talking about. This could be faith-based, it could be civic organizations, it could be government it doesn't matter. But it's somebody who's upset politically, right? They're upset politically. They're not getting, there's no, the validation isn't there, right? They're not getting validated because they're probably doing it for the wrong reasons. And then what happens with their frustration, right? If they don't come to terms with it and deal with it in a healthy way, what do you think happens? Then they become a political bully, right? And then that bullying they just look for other targets to target. And then they become those who hunt or feed on others. Their whole paradigm is set up that way. So it's this vicious circle. Betrayal can create such a vicious circle, and it can be so subtle. It can be subtle as a couple people talking about another person. And to be clear, a couple people talking about another person, especially if there's a manipulative element to it, that is conspiring. Okay? Two or more people coming together to plot or plan against one or more other people, that is conspiring. It's not just rumor. It's not just, it's not just conversation. If they're making a plan to deal with others in a manipulative way whatsoever. It doesn't matter if it's a hair long and a hair's width. It doesn't matter if it's, the solar system wide. Conspiring, two or more people conspiring against others is conspiring, and it is a betrayal. Conspiring against others is betrayal. This is why organizations and leadership management teams have to be super careful that you're dealing with factual information, you're dealing with performance data, your I's and your T's are squared away, because if it crosses the line into talking poorly about others and tainting their character unnecessarily. I remember an organization going back quite some time where the management team, or a few of the management team, referred to every military person that came and left there, right? And then you find out later, different information, that they had PTSD. Now, people get PTSD for legit reasons, and there's nothing, nefarious about having PTSD. That is the result of trauma, right? But yet this management team was casting these former military members who are now working in the civilian world. They were casting them as having PTSD. And then you find out later they didn't have PTSD. The people who were running the place were upside down as all get out, and they were just deflecting. But in the process of deflecting, what do you think they were doing? They were betraying that person's character, right? So you can see how this becomes also this gaslighting kind of a thing is betrayal, obviously. But it can be done, undercover in the dark type of thing, or it could be out in the open. Doesn't matter how it's manifesting. Just know that it manifests. And betrayal can be in the closest of relationships as well. Could be betraying trust. This is why it's so difficult when men and women are in their own little groups visiting and doing their thing and they're talking poorly about one another. Now, it's one thing if you're joking around and having a good time. There's nothing wrong with that. None of us are perfect, and to laugh at oneself, and you should be able to laugh at yourself, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about serious stuff, right? If that sort of thing occurs, that is a betrayal. That is a betrayal of the other by many, right? And because it doesn't even matter if the others aren't involved, the one is basically betraying that person to many, right? All right, folks, I think you get a good idea of betrayal, right? It can come in many shapes and sizes. Doesn't really matter how it starts out, probably on the playground when we're kids, right? Probably starts out there where kids, and then that, as we get older, turns into, goes from harmless kind of kid stuff to more serious, harmful things, right? So keep these things in mind. What's that saying? Check yourself before you wreck yourself. Thoughts, words, deeds. Make sure that you're checking yourself. Make sure that you're observing others and being aware, because you may be getting betrayed as right now as I'm speaking. Somebody may be betraying you. That isn't to make you paranoid. That is to say, you never know. And because you never know, just to be more aware about those who conduct themselves in rumor mongering and all kinds of other things, because that is a form of betrayal, right? Social dynamic of betrayal. All right, folks. Hope you're having a great day. Remember, hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage other folks. And when you do that, not only are we helping to improve culture and help others, but we're also improving our own lives. And that's an amazing thing. We shouldn't take it for granted. Okay, folks, hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.